My friend Tom's mother answered the phone a little after 9 p.m. Tom and I were on the couch, waiting for the commercial break to end so that we could keep watching the latest episode of The Twilight Zone. I thought it was strange that I couldn't hear her say anything, even though she was well within earshot, just a little behind me in the kitchen. I turned to look at her, and she was just standing there, staring straight ahead, holding the receiver up to her ear, not saying anything. Something about her seemed off, or maybe I was just spooked from the show. I gave Tom a light punch on the shoulder. "Check it out. Is your mom all right?" Tom returned the jab and looked at his mom. He shrugged. "Shush now," he said. "It's starting up again." I gave one last look at Mrs. Jackson, who was still standing there as though in some sort of shock, then turned back to the screen. It was the episode where a Navy ship discovers a seemingly haunted submarine at the bottom of the ocean. A few minutes later, Mr. Jackson walked into the room to announce that we had 15 minutes until bedtime. Then he looked at the screen. "What in the Sam Hill are you boys watching?" he asked. "Let the children stay up and watch their program," said Mrs. Jackson from behind us. She was off the phone now. I looked at her and saw that her nose was bleeding. "Irene," said Mr. Jackson, "your nose is bleeding." Mrs. Jackson gave a nervous laugh and felt under her nose. "Oh dear," she said. "It's nothing. It's just rather dry in this house today, that's all. What do you say, William? Will you let the boys stay up and watch their show?" Mr. Jackson sighed and gave another disapproving look at the TV. "Fine," he said, "but I don't want anybody coming crying to me when the nightmares start." Just then, there was a loud knock at the front door. It startled me. Mr. Jackson looked at his watch and sighed once again. "Who's come around knocking at this time of night?" He asked nobody in particular. Then he went to answer the door. I watched him open it a crack, and then just stand there. I couldn't hear anything, or see anybody out there past his body. I gave Tom another punch. He groaned. "Come on," he said. "We're gonna miss the end." "Who do you think that is there at the door?" I asked in a whisper. "Don't know and don't care," said Tom. "Can everybody please shush up now?" Tom turned back to the screen, but I didn't. I was watching Mr. Jackson. He stood there for a long time, not moving. Finally, he closed the door, and when I could see his face again, it looked like his nose was bleeding. "Enjoy the show, boys," he said cheerfully before disappearing down the hall. A moment later, Mrs. Jackson came out of the kitchen and walked past us to the stairs. She walked up them, with each step making a heavy creak. I felt unsettled, but I could tell that Tom wasn't. He was absorbed by the show. It's probably just the show making me feel scared, I thought again. At 12 years old, I wasn't allowed to watch such things at home. It was only occasionally at a sleepover like this that I could view that kind of weird, disorienting content. At 10 o'clock, the show ended, and the grandfather clock bellowed out the hour. There was no sign of Tom's parents, which I thought was strange. "That was fantastic," said Tom. "Don't you think?" "It was great," I said. "We should probably be getting to bed now, right?" "I guess so," said Tom. "Hey, where did your dad get off to? I saw him walking down the hall. I thought your parents' room was upstairs. What's down the hall?" Tom shrugged. "He calls it his study." "I don't know. It's just this weird room with a bunch of bookshelves. It's like, this house was built before they had TV, you know? Even before they had radio. No record players, no nothing. Can you imagine that? All you could do was read books or twiddle your thumbs. And I don't think comics were around back then either, just words, words, words." I forced a laugh. "Oh, so he goes there a lot. Late at night?" I asked. Tom shrugged again. "Not really, I guess. I don't know. Come on. I guess we better get to bed before he comes out and finds us and gets mad. He's probably drinking in there. He does do that sometimes." We headed upstairs to Tom's room, up the creaky steps. Tom opened the door to his room, and I saw a figure standing there in the darkness. I screamed. "What's your problem?" asked Tom, elbowing me. "That's just Freddy. He's probably sleepwalking again, and now you're going to wake him up and he's going to start bawling." Freddy was Tom's younger brother, about 7 years old. He was just standing there in the middle of the room, perfectly still. Then he started whispering. I couldn't make it out at first, but he kept repeating the same thing over and over, and I finally got it. It's been so long. It's been 100 years. It's been too long. There is no moon. What? Why is he saying that? I asked. Damned if I know, said Tom. He's dreaming. Come on, help me get him back in bed. He'll be fine. We each grabbed one of Freddy's arms. As soon as we did so, his eyes snapped open and he started screeching. It was a primal scream of pure terror and hurt my ears. Shush, said Tom. Come on, Freddy. Everything's okay. It's just me and Bobby. You just had a bad dream. Come on now. They're coming back, said Freddy. They're already here. That unsettled me a great deal. Who's coming, Freddy? I asked. Don't egg him on, snapped Tom. He's still half asleep. Come on, help me get him in bed. I followed Tom's lead, and together we hoisted his little brother onto the bottom bunk. I felt Freddy shivering as we set him down, but as soon as his head hit the pillow, he was asleep. That Twilight Zone is good stuff, right? Said Tom, climbing up the ladder to the top bunk. It sure is, I said, not sure if I really felt that way. I settled onto the sleeping bag that was set out on the floor. Tomorrow, if it's nice out, we'll bike downtown, said Tom. That would be great, I said. All right, good night. Good night. I could hear Tom's breathing slow down as he fell asleep, but I had trouble calming my mind down. A large part of me wanted to call my parents and have them pick me up, but I knew that would make me a wimp, and after all, what had really happened? A phone call, a knock at the door, a couple of nosebleeds, and some sleepwalking. No big deal. I heard the clock downstairs boom out the hour. 11 o'clock. Then I heard the creak of the steps. That's just Mr. Jackson coming up from the study. I heard footsteps walk past the room we were in, and then a door opening and closing. Everything is normal. I was starting to finally drift off when I heard what sounded like a door slam shut downstairs. My eyes shot open. There shouldn't be anybody downstairs. Or maybe I just dipped off to sleep and somebody went down there for a snack or something. Then I heard another door slam shut from somewhere else in the house. Then yet another. I heard more footsteps coming down the hall. They stopped right outside of Tom's room. I pulled the sleeping bag over my head as my heart pounded away. There was a gentle tapping at the door. "Dearies," I heard. It sounded like Mrs. Jackson. "Is everything okay in there? I thought I heard little Freddy crying out." It didn't make any sense. That had happened a long time ago, maybe even an hour ago. We had headed up just after 10, and it had already been some time since the clock struck 11. Maybe it was more than an hour ago, and she was just now coming to check up? "Yoo-hoo," said Mrs. Jackson softly through the door. "I do hope that everyone's sleeping soundly in there. Midnight is almost upon us, and there is no moon." I heard her footsteps move away down the hall, towards the stairs. She was going downstairs, that terrible creak resounding throughout the house with each slow step. By that point, I could no longer pretend that things were normal, no matter how hard I tried. "Tom," I whispered. "Tom." I stood up quietly and crept over to the bunk bed. I reached up to shake Tom awake and something grabbed my leg. I screamed again and tried to pull away. I broke free and fell back onto my behind, my head spinning. Tom groaned. "Oh, what are you doing? Go back to sleep." "Something grabbed my leg," I said, reaching up and flipping on the light switch. "Oh, no, turn that off." "What's wrong with you?" said Tom. I'm sorry I grabbed your leg, Bobby," said Freddy from the bottom bunk. "I was just trying to be funny. I don't know if everybody here's having a big laugh at me and I don't care," I said. "I want to go home." "What?" said Tom, rubbing his eyes and sitting up. "Because my idiot brother played a prank on you?" "No," I said. "I was ready to go before that. Something's not right in this house. I keep hearing doors open that aren't supposed to be opening. And your parents are acting weird. Everyone's nose is bleeding and they're talking about how there's no moon. I want to go home right now." Tom laughed. Didn't realize you were such a wimp. That Twilight Zone really got to you, huh, pal? Well, if you want to go. A loud bang coming from right under us cut Tom short. It was like somebody had struck the floor with a sledgehammer from underneath. "Oh, hell," whispered Tom. "What was that?" "I told you, something's wrong here." The clock rang out the midnight hour. "I'm scared," said Freddy. We heard the footsteps first, coming down the hall towards the room. They sounded squishy. Shortly after that, the scraping noise started up, like somebody was dragging something along the hall wall as they walked. We sat there frozen and wide-eyed with terror, the brothers on their beds and me on the floor. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. The doorknob turned slowly and the door swung open. Standing there was the most ghastly thing I could have imagined. It was a man with gray skin, dripping wet, and holding a small anchor that was chained to a collar around his neck. He was skeletally thin and naked, with a few strands of coarse black hair sticking out from his otherwise bald head. We all started screaming. I jumped to my feet and backed up against the bunk bed. "It's been so long," said the man in a low rattle, which I could somehow hear over our screams. He stepped into the room. "Everybody, the window!" shouted Tom. There was a window in the wall adjacent to the bunk beds, about halfway between us and the horrible man in the doorway. Tom was right. It was our only chance. We scrambled to the window and I threw it open as Tom dragged Freddy by the arm. "You go first, Freddy. Just jump and run. It's going to be cold, but you can do it, pal. I know you can." But Freddy never made it. The man lunged at him and yanked him from Tom's grasp. Then the man drove a hooked end of the anchor into Freddy's skull with a thunk. He pulled it out, along with chunks of Freddy's brains, and drove it home again. Tom was crying and screaming, watching his brother die. I took him by the shoulders and shoved him to the window. "Your brother's gone," I said. "Jump!" But Tom was frozen in shock. I was about to push him out the window when I saw a gray hand gripping the ledge from the outside. I chanced to look out there and saw another horrible skeletal man holding onto the window with one hand and holding an anchor in the other. He looked at me with dead eyes, and I knew that if we tried to escape that way, at least one of us would die. The man in the room with us was still driving the anchor into Freddy's lifeless head, again and again and again. I grabbed Tom by the shirt and we made a break for the door while the man in the room with us was distracted by his gruesome act of murder. The moment we were in the hallway, there was a loud crash, and we saw Mr. Jackson come flying through the closed door of his bedroom, splintering it apart. He had an anchor stuck in his chest, attached to a chain leading back into the bedroom. He was gasping for help around the blood pouring out his mouth. "Dad!" screamed Tom, his face soaked with tears. The thing on the other end of the chain gave a yank, and Mr. Jackson's body disappeared back into his bedroom. "We can't help him," I said, with as much calm as I could muster. "We have to save ourselves." Tom nodded, and we ran down the stairs. When we got downstairs, we saw two gray men standing by the front door, swinging anchors attached to the iron collars on their thin, sickly necks. We scampered around the house, looking for a way out. But every window we saw was guarded by one of the horrible men. As we ran through the living room, I saw Mrs. Jackson sitting at the kitchen table. Her severed head was on the table, dripping with blood and torn bits of organ, staring at me with wide, dead eyes. "The basement," gasped Tom. "There's a few small windows down there. Maybe one of us can make it." I didn't want to go into the basement, but I didn't see any other way out. If we were doomed to die, we might as well exhaust our options. Tom led us to the basement door and swung it open. A stale stench hit us right away, and as Tom flicked on the light switch, I could see that the basement was flooded with several feet of water. "It's our only chance," I said, as much to convince myself as to convince Tom. Behind us, we heard doors opening and closing all throughout the house, and the scraping of metal anchors over various surfaces. They were starting to close in on us. We descended the basement stairs. "There," said Tom, pointing to a small daylight window up near the ceiling. "You get that ladder, I'll get a hammer from Dad's workbench." We waded through the water and went after our respective items. The water came up to my chest, and it felt like it took an eternity to reach the ladder standing up in the corner. All the while, the sounds from above seemed to be converging towards the basement door. Finally, we set up the ladder in front of the window, just as we heard wet footsteps coming down the basement steps. "You go first," said Tom, handing me the hammer. "Smash the window, get out and run. I'm right behind you." I made it up the ladder and smashed the window. I struggled to crawl through the opening, the shards of glass tearing into my bare arms. But I made it, into the cold, moonless winter night. The air chilled my wet body, but I felt an incredible relief to be out of the house. I turned to look at Tom. He was halfway up the ladder when a gray hand reached out of the water and dragged him down under. I ran into the night. This horrible event occurred 56 years ago. When the police finally arrived at 327 Cedar Lane, the house was empty. There was no sign of bloodshed or a struggle, no sign of the Jacksons. I underwent several psychiatric evaluations. Nobody believed my version of events, and yet nobody could explain the disappearance of the Jacksons. Eventually, I learned that it was easier to lie about what had happened and say that the Jacksons were called away in the middle of the night on a family emergency and dropped me off at home on the way out. I said that the cuts on my arms were from rough housing with Tom earlier. I left Portland, Maine for college, but returned in my late 30s to take care of my ailing father. As far as I know, the house at 327 Cedar Lane has sat empty all of these years. The Registry of Deeds says that the title is held by Stephen Jackson, and the city tax commitment says that he currently resides in Sweden. The house has been kept up just enough to avoid code violations. But I have never seen anybody there, until last night. I was walking my dog down Cedar Lane at around 9 p.m. last night. I looked up in shock to see a light on in the kitchen. There was a man standing there looking out. He was about my age. I kept walking into the night and haven't been able to stop thinking about that house since. After so many years of lying about what had happened, I think that I started to believe the lies myself. No more lies. I am ready to honor the life of my friend and his family by telling the truth that I know and finding out the truth that I don't know. To that end, I have contacted Myra Kindle, a reporter whose work I follow and greatly admire for its uncompromising drive to uncover the truth. I was quite surprised and thrilled when she agreed to look into the horrific happenings at 327 Cedar Lane. She tells me that her report is forthcoming shortly, and I hope that you will read it. Myra Kindle Report. A report on the gray men of 327 Cedar Lane. Americana. In Portland, Maine, about 100 miles northeast of Boston, lies an unassuming house that might just have a remarkable history. Slightly dilapidated but brimming in classic Americana architecture, a two-story home on 327 Cedar Lane once housed the typical American family. 2 boys, a mother and father, lived happily there for more than a decade, until one night on January 10th, 1963, everything changed. Police would say a husband, wife, and 2 young children disappeared on their own prerogative, ostensibly moving to Sweden, where documents suggest the father resides to this day. There is, however, another account of what happened to the Jackson family of 327 Cedar Lane, one that is in direct contradiction to what the police say occurred. In this account, the family did not move on their own accord. In this account, they were brutally murdered by forces not of this world. While the home on Cedar Lane looks run down and abandoned in much the same way it has for the last 56 years, new sightings offer a glimpse of a possible return of those forces that violently evicted the Jackson family all those years ago. In a special report brought to you in conjunction with Reddit user nslewis, independent investigative journalist Myra Kindle explores the mystery of 327 Cedar Lane and attempts to uncover the secret that led to the mysterious disappearance of the Jackson family in 1963. child's imagination. As an independent investigative reporter, I rely on tips to subsume the public interest and direct me to stories across the United States and the world. Often these tips come with corroboration in the form of documentation, other reporting, or numerous eyewitness accounts. The tip I received most recently is different. It has brought me to Portland, Maine on a single account, one that has no corroboration of any form. With no complementary evidence and a mountain of facts to the contrary, there is little reason for this reporter to believe the story of Robert "Bobby" Martin. However, after relaying his account to me and subsequently publishing it on r/NoSleep, I'm left at an impasse. There might be no evidence to back up Bobby Martin's account of a ghastly night in 1963 that saw the complete destruction of the Jackson family, but embedded in his story are details too well tied together for this reporter to ignore. After arriving in Maine and speaking with Mr. Martin, 68, I believe he is telling the truth in his account, and I believe he indeed witnessed the demise of the Jackson family. In his words, when he was 12, he witnessed the brutal slaying of the Jacksons at the hands of gray men, pale figures with anchors around their necks that seemed intent on destruction and fear. In Bobby Martin's telling, the gray men of 327 Cedar Lane murdered the Jackson family by smashing an anchor into a young boy's skull, tearing out the chest of a man, decapitating a mother, and by drowning another young boy. Included in his account, however, is more than grim horror. There are details with great historical significance. There is the detail that Mr. and Mrs. Jackson experienced nosebleeds, that a force in the home was directing residents to say, "There is no moon," and of course the vivid descriptions of the gray men themselves, sickly, skinny beings of gray skin, long stranded wet black hair, and anchors around their necks. These details, while individually horrific, add up to a depiction of a key historical event in the area, one that happened around 100 years prior to the Jackson family's disappearance in 1863. When thinking of the state of Maine, the American Civil War is not the first thing that comes to mind. You might think no battles were fought in a state so far north, but you would be wrong. The Civil War was fought in 10,000 places, from Valverde, New Mexico, and Tullahoma, Tennessee, to St. Albans, Vermont, and Fernandina on the Florida coast. It claimed more than 600,000 American lives, and it affected every American then and for generations to come. Maine, a state so dedicated to the anti-slavery abolitionist movement that years before the war, residents had already distanced themselves from traders in the South, also saw its share of blood. Starting in the spring of 1863, Charles Redd, a young man who just a few years earlier had served in the Federal Navy but pledged his support to the Confederacy after the war broke out, hatched a daring plan to take the fight to the Northern Union. Accompanied by a little more than 20 Confederate sailors, Redd sailed up along the northeastern coast, raiding fishing towns and taking out transport ships that ferried coal and other supplies to Union troops. Several times along his journey, he burned the ship he was on and switched vessels to faster, stronger ships that incidentally had the advantage of not being hunted by Union naval forces. At just 23 years of age, Redd was reckless in his journey north, and in June of '63, his luck ran out. Wolf in sheep's clothing, Redd's tactics were one of cunning, not of outgunning. Armed with few men and just one cannon, Charles Redd did not engage enemy soldiers, instead preying on commercial ships and using deception to bring them to his capture. He frequently flew a Union flag upside down when approaching a harbor. This sign of distress was met with ships offering aid, but once they got close, his men would spring up from their hiding places, kill those who fought back, and capture a new ship. In total, more than 20 ships were burned, looted, or captured this way. Deaths were common, and often the victims were civilians simply trying to protect their property. The plan, while violent and vindictive, had worked well enough, that is, until Portland, Maine. Attacking Portland Harbor, Redd had already built up a reputation, and increasingly more Union Navy ships were looking for him. With forces hot on his tail, as a last-ditch effort to evade capture, Red once again moved his men and equipment to a new ship they stole from Portland and burned the ship they were on, the CSS Tacony. Transferring to the commercial fishing ship, the Archer, Red and his men fled Portland Harbor and were unexpectedly given chase not just by the Union Navy, but also by the residents of Portland themselves. Keep in mind Maine's reputation for their abolitionist stance, and perhaps you can understand why several dozen fishermen took muskets, got in their own boats, and gave chase to Charles Red. Out in the Atlantic, Red's ship was destroyed. A stray bullet hit a stash of gunpowder that was loaded onto the Archer, and the ship burst into flames. While some of Red's men were immediately killed in the explosion, Red and most of his crew were able to escape on lifeboats. Charles Red and his surviving men were then captured and brought back to Portland Harbor. Prisoners. The residents of Portland, Maine, would have to house Charles Red and his men for a month until July of 1863, when they could be moved to larger prison in Boston, Massachusetts. During this time, there was the very real fear of retribution on Red's men, and whether deserving of extrajudicial punishment or not, the mayor of Portland tried his hardest to abide by the rule of law. Unable to hold the prisoners at the local jail out of fear of reprisals, Red and his men were kept out of sight in the basement of a newly constructed home, 327 Cedar Lane. There in the dark, kept out of sight of residents, the Confederate prisoners had makeshift anchors placed around their necks and then tied to a long metal bar laid into the foundation of the home. By hiding the prisoners in the basement of 327 Cedar Lane, the mayor of Portland may have been able to avoid any retribution killings, but what he didn't realize was the inherent danger in anchoring prisoners to a basement floor in the middle of summer. Accident. Before moving the prisoners to Boston in the middle of the night, reportedly out of fear the townsfolk would seek vengeance if they witnessed the transfer, a summer rainstorm hit Portland. This twice-a-century downpour covered the area, killing crops, making road travel impossible, and flooding basements. As the rainstorm hit, the basement of 327 Cedar Lane flooded too. And as the water level rose, with Red and his men still chained to the bar laid in the foundation of the house, soon they were struggling for air. There they wavered in the basement, bobbing up and down for hours, desperately trying for breath. Struggling in the water and dying slowly, the acute asphyxiation of the prisoners caused nosebleeds. Internment breaths and a lack of air to the brain caused minor hemorrhaging, and blood would have ran down their faces, with the effect getting worse over time, a marker of their death to come. After being chained to the basement for more than 3 hours, struggling for breath and fighting with the anchors around their necks, tied to the foundation, their captors were finally made aware of the flooding that left the men between a state of life and death. Aware of their agony, a rescue team worked quickly, but things weren't in their favor. In the monsoon-like conditions, with Red and his men struggling for air, adding to their struggles was the lack of light. The flames that illuminated the basement had been extinguished with rain, and the moonlight that would normally illuminate the town had been blocked by the cloud carrying the downpour. With no moonlight and no lanterns to aid them, the flooded basement was impossible to navigate for Red's captors. Through sheer luck alone, Red and several men were saved, but alas, some 8 men died that night in the dark. They died drowning, listening to the sounds of the enemy they had spent pillaging, trying to save them. They may not have been good men, but they were men, and they died in agony and in anger. They died desperately trying for their last breath, struggling and slashing in water as their necks anchored and tied them to the floor. Red and the remaining men that were saved from the basement were moved just a short while later to Boston, and then the deaths of 8 Confederate prisoners in a basement in Maine became just another footnote of history, a detail to live in the past and be forgotten in the preset. Forgotten, I suppose, until 1963, when on a cold January evening, corrupt forces with details of the men that died in that basement slayed the Jackson family. It's that connection to the past that has brought me to Maine, that has led me to believe that a 12-year-old Bobby Martin really did witness otherworldly forces in 1963. What remains? As I interview Bobby Martin for this story, he is frightened. His fear is not one of the past and what happened to him when he was 12. That fear will live with him forever, but it is not prime in his mind today. Today, Mr. Martin worries about 327 Cedar Lane and the lights that have returned. A storm that occurs twice a century, one that took the lives of 8 Confederates 100 years ago, could be back. It could be brewing and waiting to slay more lives of any who enter the old Jackson house. Bobby, even in fear, is strong. At 68 years of age, he says he will enter the house again. He says he will explore the basement where more than half a century ago he saw his childhood friend taken. He says he will do this because he is looking for something. He is looking for what remains of the bodies of the Confederates. Mr. Martin ventures into the house as I wait outside. It is around noon on a warm spring day in 2019, but chills run down my spine. As I see him enter the house, I am worried he will not return. I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I believe in details. And the details of Mr. Martin's childhood account too closely match Portland's Civil War history for me to think he is completely safe. I wait for nearly an hour as I grow more concerned. There has been no noise from the house, not a peep. Through hesitation and fear, I find the courage to enter the house and go down to the basement. There I see Bobby, and with him, bones, the remains of bodies. All the bones are dirty, but some more noticeably than others. I help him pack up the bones he has found, and we walk up the stairs together. Leaving the house, I think I feel an airy presence, something like a light hug through a thick jacket. I'm not sure, but it feels heavy for a moment, like it's dragging down the bones I'm helping carry from the house. Outside, I tell Mr. Martin that I have an old friend in the area, a professor of forensic anthropology at the University of Southern Maine. I suggest we take the bones there to inspect them, and he agrees to join me. On the car ride to the university, Bobby considers the bones we have with us and says, "Some of the remains. They look small, like that of a child." I don't know what to say. I so rarely speak to sources in this way, and a trauma of 60 years past is one I don't think I can comfort. Bones of 12. In a basement lab near the center of campus, Mr. Martin and I speak to, and my old friend, Professor of Forensic Anthropology, Clarence Williams. He inspects the remains we have and asks where we found them. Before we can explain, he says, "Extraordinary, these are so old but in great condition, like they were preserved in a layer of silt below a riverbed. These bones must be 150 years old at least." "All of them. Are they all that old?" asks Bobby, a slight tremble in his voice, like he's unsure if he wants the answer. "Well, there's a lot of bodies here," replies Professor Williams. "I would say most of these remains are that old, but certainly not the children." "The children?" I ask. "Yes, it looks like 2 children, one around age 11 to 14 and the other a little bit younger, maybe just 7 to 9. 2 boys to be exact. There's also a set of female and male bones too that are about 100 years younger than the rest of what you have in this older set of 8. I would say you have 12 bodies total. 8 of them are about 150 years old. The other 4 are closer to 50 years old." "And the young ones, the children, do you know how they died?" asks Bobby. Williams is silent for a moment before taking a deep breath and starts. "Tragically, it would appear. The youngest here appears to have died by having his cranium repeatedly bashed in with a sharp-tipped object, maybe a hammer or—" "An anchor?" interrupts Bobby. "Yes, Mr. Martin, I suppose an anchor would be possible. The other bones that are around 50 years old are also very severely damaged." Williams points to the woman's bones. "You can see here, for example, the woman's upper vertebrae were fractured when someone struck her neck. The force appears strong enough that it may have even decapitated her. For the man here, It looks like a bludgeoning to the rear of his back, but you can see an exit wound out the front of his rib cage. A brutal way to die that would require a tremendous amount of force. "What about the older boy, the 12-year-old?" asks Mr. Martin. Williams pauses again before speaking. "Well, like I said, I don't know if he's 12. The range is between 11 and 14, but his cause of death is harder to deduce by just looking at the bones. It could be something internal or organ-related. Drowning? Sure, I suppose that's possible. In fact, with this young boy and the other 8 remains, the bones that are 150 years old at least, it could be drowning or an internal injury that killed all of them." Bobby Martin doesn't hear the last words of Williams before he heads for the door. He's heard enough, and I quickly thank Professor Williams before catching up to him. In the stairwell to the basement forensic lab, I see Bobby crying. The image of a 68-year-old man, one who no doubt has had his fair share of misery and heartbreak. To see him crying is a sight that crushes my soul. I extend a hand onto his back and he turns to me, still tearing. I'm alive because of him, the boy, the 12-year-old. My friend, he told me to go first, to escape without him. He let me live this life, let me grow up and have a family of my own. He sacrificed everything. A deep breath and Mr. Martin's back straightens. He's distraught, but he begins climbing the stairs. I ask him to wait for a moment, and I return to Professor Williams to collect the remains of the 12 bodies of 327 Cedar Lane. Haunting. As Mr. Martin and I drive back from the university and to downtown Portland, we stop in front of the Jacksons' old home. There in front of the house where 12 people have died, I see it. The lights Mr. Martin had described. Windows of the house flicker with light in shades of brightness like a power surge. For a brief moment, I think I see something. A shadow in a window. The image reveals itself for just a second, but in my mind I see a shadow so defined that I'm certain someone is walking in the house. "We have the bones, but spirits still remain," says Bobby. He looks away from the house and turns to me. "How do we get this to stop?" I look at the house, at the activity of spirits unrested. I think about how 8 Confederates died there 150 years ago, about the rainstorm that caused their demise. I think about the moonless night, the nosebleeds, and the home where the only force present is death. I turn on the car and drive away from the house, pulling a U-turn at the end of the block and start heading for the highway. "Where are you going?" asks Mr. Martin. "If you'll come with me to Virginia," I respond. I look to the old man's face and see a subtle sign of understanding. He turns on the radio, looking for the weather forecast. "Another rainy night here in Maine, a real downpour," says the radio meteorologist. "I guess global warming is making those twice-a-century rainstorms happen more often all the time." The meteorologist concludes his report, and Mr. Martin switches the radio to music as we start our 8.5-hour drive south. Rest. We arrive in Virginia in the early morning, catching the DC traffic that extends our trip by several hours. Finally, we make it to our destination, the Confederate Memorial at Arlington National Cemetery. I open the trunk and take out a small hand shovel that I use for gardening, and then I reach for the bones. The 8 sets of Confederate soldiers. "I want to do this," I say as I begin shoveling on sacred ground, "but this is definitely wrong. We're not supposed to bury these bones here." "On whose authority is it wrong?" replies Mr. Martin. I look at his old face, contemplate his meaning, and keep digging. After an all-nighter driving, it takes me a moment to understand. This may be wrong. Heck, these men might be wrong, but they deserve rest. We all deserve rest, says Mr. Martin. I finish the shallow hole and bury the 8 sets of Confederate bones. Getting up to my feet, I join Mr. Martin as we cross our hands. I think of something fitting to say, but I am at a loss for words. A moment of silence and Mr. Martin starts. "In life you may have chosen evil. In death you may have been forced into evil. But now you can rest. You can lay with your brethren and find peace, no matter your transgressions." I turn to him as he finishes speaking, but his attention is focused solely on the dead soldiers' remains. We return to the car, and I begin driving north back to Maine with the bones of the Jackson family still in the trunk. We take our time on the way back, stopping at a hotel where I get some much-needed rest from driving. The next day we arrive in Portland, and I drop Mr. Martin off by his house and leave him with the remains of the Jacksons. I ask him what he will do with their bodies, and he says that since he always heard the family had moved to Sweden, maybe he'll take them there. In his voice is a light tremble that says he's just not sure. As I prepare to leave Maine and go back to New York, I travel one last time to the house at 327 Cedar Lane. As I wait outside the house, listening to the radio and waiting for nightfall, the same meteorologist from the other night comes over the air. Another stormy night, tonight. Lots of rain and no moonlight is set to hit lower Maine again. As the sun sets and I gaze upon the house, I see no lights, no activity. The rain starts, a house is at rest, and I begin my drive home.